So I'll talk a little bit about some of the trends that we've seen over the last year or so, and how it can provide, again, substantiation for the fact that, so this conference has been refocused now, at least from a banner standpoint, about analytics, and that it's prompted a growth, and it's a healthy growth. So I'm probably going to tell you a little bit of a story that you're probably already well aware of, but if nothing else, it just makes it a little bit easier to justify your expense report while you're here. Talk a little bit about what P&G is about and what our background is, a little bit about the corporate bit of it, and then the analytic organization, some of the specific work we do, and then how we're setting a platform up corporate-wide to really explode analytics throughout the company in a very large way. And then I'll wrap up with a couple of pointers in terms of what I think really what it takes from a personal standpoint, from a personal analyst standpoint, and from managing analysts. What are some of the fundamental keys to success? And hopefully have enough time for Q&A, but certainly don't hesitate to interrupt and throw out a question or two as we go along here. I hate talking heads. I like the interactivity, so please, by all means. So that's kind of where we're at. So P&G is a big company, a lot of people working for it. Let's see what the local number. Okay, 127,000 people. Probably the more interesting thing is the number of different brands that we market globally. There's over 300. We have on-the-ground operations in virtually every major country in the world. We compete across 27 or 28 distinctive different product categories in the CPG industry with very different supply chains that operate behind them, very different markets that we're serving, very different consumer needs that we provide products for. And that makes it a really interesting place to work at because of the diversity of the types of problems that are presented. You probably know some of these. For those of you who've tolerated one of my talks before, you know what my standard line is from here. It's believed, at least in the U.S., that P&G products are found in upwards of 98, 95%, 99% of U.S. households. If you don't believe me, invite me over. I will find them and I will prove it. So they're definitely there. These represent, it says there are 24 of these are billion-dollar brands. Each one of them represents a billion-dollar franchise by themselves. The diapers, the Pampers itself, it's interesting. I keep telling the marketing people, you've kind of missed the boat here. Where's Pampers? That is the largest, and by a factor of 8. It's teaming in the area of about $7 to $8 billion brand for P&G. It's a very large franchise. So big growing businesses and lots of interesting ways to compete. Our purpose is touching and improving lives more completely around the world. And this is part of what the culture of P&G is about. And it's manifested from the top, and it's manifested throughout everything that we do. Right down to individual work plans need to be articulated in a way that show that what they are doing at the end of the day is improving our consumers' lives in some fundamental way. Organizationally, there are basically 4 pillars in P&G. One that's focused on delivering the product locally into the markets. We call those MDOs, Market Development Organizations. There are the largest entity, though, are global business units. They are the product business units. They are generally managed from a global perspective, but very much from a regional execution standpoint. The organization that our analytics organization is in global business services. So we're set up to provide services to each one of the essentially 15 different business units that operate across the company. There are about 9 or 10 product business units, and then about another 5 MDO organizations that are located in the from a pure supply chain analysis standpoint, the way to think of it is we go to the global business units when they need to think about what their supplier sourcing strategy is, what their manufacturing base needs to look like, what some of their inventory policies need to look like. We go to the MBO organizations to take a look at local distribution and market penetration issues. So that's kind of how we kind of look at our different clients. The key is that we're in GBS, and it is a service-oriented organization. Recent trends. So it's interesting. So the keynote speaker today not only talked a little bit about what I'll share here, but I actually stole this from my good friend Jack Levis from UBS. So I'm out of school, so plagiarism's okay. That's the way I look at it. So you do Google Trends on operations research. It's not looking so good. Last couple of years, both in search index as well as news references. It's kind of, at least from a search index standpoint, it's kind of petering out a little bit, with a couple of spikes in terms of news references taking place, in the last couple of years. A little bit of a growing trend there. They do a search on the term analytics, and it's quite a different picture thrown there, both from search as well as from news reference. It's interesting that the searching preceded news referencing by about 2 years in a substantial way. I have no idea. Don't ask. I don't know what that is. I call that data anomaly. I'm not quite sure what preceded that, what that spike was. The only thing I can think of is that I think that roughly corresponds to when the HBR article, Competing in Analytics, came out. That's my only connection on that. So, but this is the way statistics can lie, because you need to put them on the same scale. And analytics isn't growing, both from a search volume as well as from a news reference standpoint. And OR is a bit of a flatliner in comparison. Now, I'm 53, but I don't want my children referring to me as the guy who's a flatliner in his profession. So I think the whole area of analytics is exploding. Now, we had a very interesting conversation with the Informs Roundtable yesterday and into last night about who really owns the equity around analytics. That's for another time and place. But I think the key is that this whole area is being referenced by news services, that it is about analytics. And like it or not, OR should really be considered to be part of the whole analytics mainstream that's going on. Now, there's more fire to that. Last year, McKinsey Institute issued a very nice report on big data and the implications of it in a number of different areas. But I picked out of it a couple of charts showing how they broke down big data and servicing the needs of big data into 3 fundamental areas: deep analytical, okay, all about anything quantitative, just big data savvy, so domain knowledge of how you apply that in the field, and then it's the technology aspect of it in terms of supporting it. So it's interesting that they note right off the bat operations research is a key area that's mainstay about deep analytical. They go on in their report to then do a projection on the needs of deep analytical talent that's needed out for the next 5 to 6 years. And they project a huge gap in terms of supply versus what the demand is going to be on that. And I think that's again a telling story behind both the surge and the interest in this space. So the demand is certainly there, but each and every one of you should feel extremely happy about the prospects for the futures of everyone's careers here, because they're bright and rosy, and there's a great opportunity to not only take great application of operations research, but leadership of operations research and big or deep analytics, or whatever we end up calling it in this space. Because it's going to take savvy leadership to understand how do you leverage an extremely scarce resource most effectively against big problems. Again, how do you do it effectively and efficiently? combination of using internal capability that businesses have to have, or organizations have to have internally, to identify the problems and the right way to solve them, but then partnering correctly externally, both with quant houses as well as with offshore capability. And it's going to take the leadership to really understand how to close that gap, because that gap will not just be closed by in a very short time. So I think again, there's great opportunity. Just a couple other graphics here. Information Week, just recently in April, again, big headline story on a report that's tied to their salary survey. Again, big splashy headline there saying there's a big talent gap projected on out. And then finally, Bloomberg Business Week also issued a report recently about current state of business analytics. This was SAS Institute underwrote this study as well, but one of the key pieces is organizations themselves simply just don't have the right, proper analytical talent. That should, again, spell for everybody here there's great opportunity. And finding the right kind of those opportunities and how to leverage them, how to leverage your talents effectively in them. And finally, if you're really looking for a job, I think this posting is still up. It should. I think it ends abruptly though at a certain point in time. Through November of 2012. So who knows who they filled the role, but again, advanced analytics is penetrating everywhere. So SAS Institute did us a nice favor about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was in conjunction with the Competing on Analytics book that Davenport released, and it created this sort of projection around the business value and competitive advantage that you derive by increasing the level and the penetration and depth of analytical capability within an organization. Now, we've taken a little bit of liberty with this. This is sort of our own internal spin about this, but it's essentially still the same, because one of the things that was missing out of that was decision analysis, and I think that's a core capability that we've at least leveraged very effectively at P&G, and we think it's in this upper scale of analytics, because it's while quantitatively it can be challenging, it is more about the facilitation of getting the right decision and framing up the problem appropriately in the first place. We'll come back to this. This laid the groundwork for us to think about how do we reinvent the capability of P&G in the analytics space, and use this as our guiding post, because it's more than just having great quantitative capability. The basics need to be there in order to grow the platform. And again, I'll talk about this again in a couple of minutes. So today, let me start with the come from state for a minute and then talk about how we got to here. 15 years ago, Jeff Kam and I worked on a project at P&G, taking a look at consolidating excess capacity in our supply networks across North America. This is a massive problem. It covered the entire P&G operating space, all categories, all businesses, all markets, all products. Resulted in a very tidy NPV well north of $1 billion. This is in 1992. With then generating well over $200 million of savings every year. That big bang project really drove, first off, our first entry into the Edelman competition. Back in, I think, 96 is when we finally got clearance to be able to talk it externally. But it also was a wake-up call for the power of having advanced analytical capability applied to a really hard problem at P&G. So that was the beginning of growing a centrally managed organization of OR experts on call into business units. So we eventually evolved into sort of a consulting mode. The group was called Great Word of Mouth. We built up enormous equity We were up until 5 years ago called Global Analytics because we had because at the time we coined it when global was kind of a big thing for corporations to kind of get their minds wrapped around. We changed our name about 4 years ago to something that's a little bit more specific to our domain, supply chain analytics. We still to this day are referred to as global analytics by our clients. That's the power of having equity built up within an organization and being referred to it. So that was a relatively small group, though. That's grown to about 17, 18 people. In the marketing area, P&G had developed experts in the IT area of being able to take a look at market share data and being able to provide competitive analyses, how our products are doing in the market, how's promotion activity doing, and looking at pricing studies, etc. But those analysts were generally hired locally, and they were really there at the beck and call of a business unit general manager or a marketing director or what. And in many, many instances, the number grew to about 70 or 80. And you couldn't pick two and guarantee that they knew each other. They're completely operated autonomously in the businesses. So 5 years ago, we recognized, first off, that the whole area of analytics is going to grow eventually. And so the CIO of our organization brought together all of these independently operating marketing analysts together with our supply chain analytic organization and created one group. The marketing analysts stayed within the business units, but instead of being local line management, they're centrally managed. That was a huge difference because now what we were able to do is not only connect the dots between these marketing analysts who were doing analyses that were virtually the same from one business to the next, start leveraging scale, start leveraging the expertise that was out there in one central group. So today, 4 or 5 years later, it's now grown to about 150 business analysts. This is actually a little old slide. It's probably more like 160, 170 now. It's dominated by marketing-related analysts. Our group has grown to about 18 or 19 from a supply chain pure OR standpoint. But the neat thing is that being part and in that same organization, we found opportunities to take OR beyond where we had originally been focused in the supply chain space and apply it to other interesting areas in terms of forecasting, pricing models, promotion analysis, retail store simulation, and other applications as well too. So it opened up a space for us to be able to operate in and apply more advanced analytics in more areas of the company. So that is that. Another part of it, as I mentioned before, the demand internally in the company, even though we've grown to a pretty substantial size, the demand still far outstrips the supply and honestly the quality of the talent. I'd like to say we've got an OR shop of 150 people. We do not. We have an OR shop of about a dozen to 15 real OR people, and the balance are systems backgrounds, some project management, a more traditional IT background, but they've become more quantitative in their skills and their analyses that they provide. And so we feel like we've got a great opportunity to build their analytic skills. But in order to do that, though, we partner externally as well. As I said, we found so many redundant analyses taking place across the company, and some of it was just very simple reporting. We needed to transform that, standardize those reports, systematize them, leverage an outside firm to be able to do that reporting, and then take that talent that we had and start building their analytical skill sets to be able to do more advanced analytical modeling. So today, this is how we are organized, and these are the areas that we focus on and deliver against. And this is kind of what I said. Just the way that we're organized in the company. Here we go. We focus on top management, each one of the individual product business units as well as the market organizations as well too. We have analytic organizations or leaders in each one of these areas. I won't steal the thunder too quickly, but we are now penetrating right up at the top of the company in this organization, and so we've kind of laid the road on out to penetrating the business from the operations end right on up to the top end of the company, and I'll explain a little bit about how we're doing that. The traditional supply chain area, working on customer and the specific channels within our trade. We do some digital analysis, some web analytics from consumer, and then we've also been doing quite a bit in the area of human resource HR modeling in order to take a look at organizations, how you transform them, understanding what your hiring profile should be, how people progress through their careers, and where you eventually want to end up from an org design standpoint. So that's that. So let me penetrate and talk a little bit more about supply chain, because that's what I know. It's a big organization at P&G. It's essentially half of the company from a personnel standpoint. Very large, over 140, 150 manufacturing plants. Keeps you busy. Lots of distribution. We characterize it that we probably operate about 500 very uniquely different supply chains across the globe. Delivering Pampers in Japan is very, very different than delivering it to Chicago. Very different supply chain. Same product essentially, with some variations, but a very different type of supply chain. So we characterize them very differently that way from the market and from the product standpoint. Recently, Gartner put out their supply chain top 25. So P&G's big in the CPG industry itself. We also have one of the top performing or well-recognized supply chain capabilities as well too. We understand that we'll probably never topple Apple because of the metrics that they use in assessing both financial health. The amount of cash that Apple's sitting on is pretty astounding. Anyway, so moving on to how do you get recognized at the top levels about things you're doing? As I mentioned before, the work that Jeff and I, almost 20 years later, still get mileage out of talking about is this great consolidation work that we did. The interesting thing is that 20 years ago, we used as part of the management analysis and decision-making process geographic information system capability. And we built this using map info technology, using Map Basic in the background. It was brand new technology at the time. And the way that we operated, because we had to deal with 32 different business units in a relatively short period of time, we built this tool very quickly and in a very interactive session worked with the key business leaders and testing different scenarios on out and getting a rough check about what might work and what might not work from a consolidation standpoint. And this was a key piece, and it's interesting how now 20 years later, the big push that we have in our whole analytics space is actually the whole use of visualization tools extensively. Again, I'll touch on that in a second. We tried again, well, we were finalisted in 96. We tried again when we partnered up with CombinedNet, bringing combinatorial optimization to bid analysis and awarding quite a bit of business. As you see, we eventually applied this to over $3 billion worth of spend in the company and reaping well north of $300 million of savings. Again, really big bang, big exposure. These are the things that flush the C-level people out and get them to come to conferences like this, to Edelman's, and really stand up for it. There's an interesting ego feedback mechanism by bringing C-levels out here to talk about the great work that their companies have done. Drives the recognition and the equity behind the use of analytics within an organization. More recently, just in 2010, we entered again as a finalist. We hold no grudges to the Edelman judging committee for only being finalists 3 times. Someone told me yesterday that 3 times it's almost like winning. I mean, you just average it out. You won So, okay, we'll take that. So this was a use of a combination of both external partner vendors tool using doing multi-echelon inventory, but it's also marrying together some of the great tools and capabilities that we've been building internally on inventory analysis since 1997, using something called Lotus 123 as a spreadsheet. And yes, I know what VisiCalc is too, so if anybody wants to top that, I can go back. I go back to cards, and if everybody wants to go back further than that, we can have a sideline discussion, but I won't go there. But the interesting thing is that we were able to cover so much of the space and use this as an engine to take a look at other areas of inventory analysis. We began with a model that started with just taking a look at our finished product, that which we eventually end up in cases and deliver on out to our retail customers. We expanded that to take a look at our raw materials as well too. We expanded that again to take a look at our in-process. We then expanded it into a very interesting and extremely impactful area for us, and that is with a CPG company, new innovations you bring to market very as quickly as you possibly can. That's what's fueling your growth. We did a terrible job of estimating how much inventory we needed to pre-build before we launched into a market. Terrible job. In fact, I think our rules of thumb dated back to about the 50s, where we used X number of weeks of forward coverage, and that was what we used. It didn't matter what the product was, it didn't matter what market it was serving, or the prospects for it being successful in the market or not. We then expanded our model to take a look at initiative volume and how much pre-build do you need to make. And that has taken on a life of its own right now and is getting its mandated deployment throughout the company for all of the top initiatives that we introduce in the market. Again, it's bringing great quant tools and proving the results of them regularly. So it's become sort of an in-process capability. All right, I don't think anyone from Kellogg's is here, right? Good. We sold Pringles to Kellogg's, and I needed to put a disclaimer that I'm not going to disclose anything that would make them uncomfortable. But I love Pringles. Because I've been associated, for some reason, analytically, we keep coming back to Pringles and providing solutions for them from an analytics standpoint. So just a couple of areas. So Pringles, everybody knows what Pringles is. I normally bring samples along in case there's a possibility for more market penetration, but I assume you all know what it is. Interesting thing is that Pringles is extremely old. It was first patented in 1937. And P&G bought the patent from a guy named Mark Pringle from Albany, New York, and developed it in the beginning of 1942, did a lot more work in the 50s, went to market in the 60s, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually an old brand. It's been around quite a bit. It's a truly a quirky brand. It's had its ups and downs in the market. And shortly after Jeff and I finished our work in the early 90s, the supply chain leader for Pringles gave us a call, said, hey, I know you did some really great work here in North America. Our business is exploding in Asia for Pringles. Can you tell me where in Asia I need to build my next plant? And the first thing we did as good analysts was said, that's not the right question. The question is, where do you need to source your volume in order to deal with a highly volatile market in Asia that's not yet proven? So we provided an analysis of the total market, and it turned out that our recommendation was don't build. Don't build in the market until you reach a threshold limit, which it took them another 10 years to reach. So it was a good decision from that standpoint, and we learned we recommended a whole different sourcing scheme for them. So then that led to a number of other different areas as well too. We started up a new plant in Mechelen, Belgium. We went and we wanted to do a vertical startup of the plant in operation. So we went down to our Jackson, Tennessee plant. We modeled end-to-end how the operation works from raw materials to product going on out the door. We basically lifted that model. We flew over to Belgium. We reapplied that as part of their operating standards in order to spin the plant up. They did it. They got the first product out the door within quality specs in dramatic record time as a result of just taking that modeling capability and reapplying that in the business. It got them into the market much, much sooner than they had expected. Now that we had two plants operating in two different hemispheres, two different currency exchanges operating, we then worked with finance folks on taking a look at capacity hedging and how you could leverage the float on your cash based on what your projected demand is going to be, and then by having a little excess capacity in operation in the two plants, leveraging that appropriately. There was a point in time where we went to Coke, and we were in the process of looking at forming an LLC where we were going to take our Sunny Delight juice business, which we eventually sold, and our Pringles business, and then go into an LLC with Coke. There were a lot of marketing reasons why it would make a lot of sense. And then I was asked by the supply chain vice president at the time to go down to the Coke building, and I went up to the 16th floor, and it's an awesome headquarters. It is an absolutely beautiful headquarters in Atlanta, and talked with the senior VP there about what capabilities we can be bringing from an analytical standpoint capability. That led to us forming the joint combined team. Now, the deal fell apart commercially, but the intent was clearly there, and it was because we had set such a strong precedence before we had the equity, we were able to go and work on a very substantial project involving two companies looking at a merger. All right, last thing is from a catastrophe standpoint, and I realize I'm getting long on the tongue here. All right, 2004, Category 4 tornado hit the Jackson, Tennessee plant. That's a railroad car on its side. That's old Pringle product there in the warehouse, just kind of all destroyed. That's the cafeteria, kind of bad. The plant manager who was who had just started at the Jackson, this is the Jackson, Tennessee plant, just started like 2 weeks before. We knew him from work that we did with him in Asia just the year before. I mean, talk about starting on a job and having a bad day. Having your plant just wiped out the next day. Not a good situation. He did the right thing. He knew of our analytical capabilities. He called us up and said, I know most would probably just say, rebuild it and let's get the operation back up and running again. But I'm looking at it as, once we clear this all away, I've got a clean sheet. What should I be doing with it? Can you help me understand what I should be doing? So we came in, we used decision analysis methods, we framed up the problem, we took a look at what are the controlling variables, what are the different scenarios that you could play against that. We did a very fundamental analysis against it. At the end of the day, what he decided to do was actually leave the concrete slab blank and took the warehousing off-site. And then eventually what we did was we actually, 2 years later, had that space available for us to take advantage of market expansion and additional capacity being able to install in that space. So that worked out well for them. All right, so future of analytics. This organization, this 150 plus analytic organization, we are all IT. It falls under business intelligence within P&G. So all analytics in those spaces that I described before are part of the business intelligence organization. Bob McDonald is our CEO. He studied operations research at West Point and understood the power and capability of having good analytical thinking. When he took the helm, he first told his general managers, I'm really tired of the company operating through a rearview mirror, and he was speaking to the general managers because the market data that they were getting about what was happening in the market was at least a month old by the time they got it. They were not operating in real time at all. So he laid down a mandate that to our CIO asking what can you be bringing to help in bringing the most up-to-date information available in a very visual way, and that we can be leveraging our analytic talent in order to help facilitate the insights for our top leadership. It's good to have a guy at the top who understands what you're about and how to leverage and use it. So over the last 2 years, the whole demand for analytics has just simply exploded across the company, and we've had to be very, very focused in how we're driving the application of analytics. So his mandate is real-time information. I want end-to-end, and I want to be the most digitally technology-capable company on the planet. I think that was a cue for me. I'll keep going until the computer shuts down, then I'll use interpretive dance to get through the rest of it. So the business intelligence now takes a look at what we really want to do is start transforming how the business operates, because this is dramatically different. What Bob was saying is, I want my top management to see the real data, not the spun data. I want to see the real data and see it throughout the company, so everyone sees the same bit of data. There's no positioning, no packaging, none of that. I want to see the raw and the real stuff. And that's, needless to say, there's a culture transformation that takes place with all of that. And you don't get that without that top management. So part of what we've created is this thing called business efficiency, and it'll take too much to explain why it's called efficiency, but the idea is that, again, using analytical talent, most up-to-date data, and utilizing technologies that are very simple and intuitive so that management can get it, make a decision, move on. The way we frame this up is very simply, in a way you could look at this as being similar to what descriptive, predictive, prescriptive is about. We just look at it as being, first tell me what is happening in the business. So just get the most up-to-date information, highly visual, let me see what's happening. Then help me understand what are the drivers behind that. Why is it, what are the things that are changing the business, and why am I seeing the behavior in my key metrics this way? And then finally, help me assess and understand what are my options and how do I determine what I should be doing next. What we created from a technology standpoint is something called the business sphere. This is a conference room that was converted about 2 years ago. This is adjacent to Bob McDonald's office. Bob uses this business sphere. What this is, there are 3 interlaced screens on 2 sides of the conference room. There's sort of a football-shaped conference table here. And what we leverage is TIBCO Spotfire. We use very, very high-end graphical capabilities to display information, to do real-time drill down and understanding what's happening in the business. And again, an analyst of ours, I think Mark Eisner's in the room someplace. There you are. So Jeff Goldman sits right there every Monday morning. Bob McDonald sits right next to him. Jeff Goldman is operations research, MEng, grad from Cornell. And I hired him 15 years ago. And today he sits next to Bob McDonald on one side, Werner Geisler, who's the chief operating officer, on the other side. And every Monday morning he tells them, this is what's happening in the market, here's what's working, here's what isn't working, and then he points to the business unit presidents and say, why isn't your business working well? And then he turns to another business unit president and say, yours is working well, share with us what your success story is. And that's how they leverage this. It's an immersive environment, it's a 1 hour, it's pretty intense, but that's how operations research has risen to be working in the boardroom today. Okay? And we've created this platform that, of course, now that Bob has it and Werner has it, every general manager around the planet has it. So smaller versions of this, there's 40 of them, it depends on how you count them, but there's 40 of these now in P&G around the planet, and they're all interconnected with each other. So an immersion session can take place in Geneva, and then be linked right on into this session that's taking place here. It's pretty cool stuff. All right, so let me wrap up here, last couple minutes. some of the things I've learned in success in analytics. It's deep domain knowledge. It's extremely important. You have to know the space that you're operating in well. And we look for that as kind of a key piece to get started. You need to understand the data and the analytics themselves. You have to have the soft skills. Jeff Goldman does not sit next to Bob McDonald deciphering formulation. Even though Jeff may be very proud of it, Jeff knows better that isn't the time or place for that. It's a very business-focused engagement and an understanding of how to speak in his client's language very effectively, and being able to deliver that in both an oral and a written manner that's effective to them. That's part of the game of what being an analyst is about. Leadership is an important piece of what we do, and I can talk all day about that. But I like to think of what we have are gifts. And the gift is objective, rational, realistic insights. And we talked earlier in one of these executive sessions about how do you organize operations research in an organization. I would say you don't want to be associated tightly with a specific business unit. You want to be as unconnected as possible to be able to provide that very objective insight and not be afraid to call what's happening in a business. Senior leaders rise to the top there, and they end up having a very wide span of responsibility. So when you have those few minutes with that senior leader, you generally tend to be here. But you have to respect the fact that they will not know in great depth the level of understanding that you have about the analytics that's behind it. Respecting the fact that they want to understand, but that whole key of talking in their language, because you only have a couple minutes to have an impact with them. And it is not about the formulation, it's about the business impact and the results and the decision that needs to be made as a result of it, and that's what the focus is about. I think this is the last thing. No Lone Rangers in our shop. We are team players. That's what we had in the past, and it wasn't effective and it wasn't efficient. The way that we operate well in the company is that we share ideas very broadly and without a lot of politics around them. We really do not reward Lone Rangers. We reward people who are playing in teams and helping the team meet the broader objective. All right, well, here's IT. So you have to find a progressive IT manager in order to get anywhere with the advanced analytics. That's the whole different topic. I won't even go there. Finally, so obviously analytics, OR, extremely healthy future. I think everyone's career here is just going to continue to blossom and go to great places over the next 5 to 10 years. I think we've done a pretty good job of it at P&G, and I think we have a long ways to go there. There's still great opportunities faced, but it is up to you to take this to the next level.